Today we're looking at the Fujifilm XT5 to see if it is a legitimate camera for you to use. We're gonna put it through the ringer today, testing out all the features that it has. Plus we're gonna be doing the spray test to see if its weather sealing is actually up to snuff, all that coming up. First I wanna look at the body of the XT5 to see if it is really up to where you need it to be for any outdoor photography activity. Now I really like the body of this on the first feel. It feels very rugged and it's actually feeling a little bit heavier and more durable than some of the previous models that I've held. It could be because of this massive lens on it, but even holding it like this, it just feels a little bit better. Now, let me say with the Fujifilm cameras, one of the biggest things that I've always had a problem with is this grip right here. I have really big hands and I don't want a small grip on here. I want a bigger grip where I can actually feel like I'm holding the camera really sturdy. I don't want to feel like I'm about to drop the camera into a canyon every single time I take it out of my bag. So that was kind of a negative for me. I wanted a bigger grip on that. Not only would a bigger grip give me a better feel of this camera, but it would also support a little bit bigger of a battery. Now, I don't have any big problems with the battery. It actually lasts a really long time, and it is a little bit bigger of a battery than other cameras that you would find in this category, and it charges really quickly because of the USB-C. But with a bigger grip, you'd get even more battery power. Since we're looking at the grip section of the body, you do get 2 SD card slots in the grip section, which is cool because a lot of people like that. More photos you can write to 2 SD cards instead of just one, quicker processing to multiple SD cards. But because SD cards are so big now, you can get all the way up to 1 terabyte at the time of this video. Do you really need 2 SD card slots anymore? It's not a huge deal for me, and it's kind of an overhyped thing with cameras. One of the things on the XT5 I'm not so low-key obsessed about is the dial system on the top. This dial system gives you everything you need right at your fingertips. If I'm out shooting, I want everything right there for me to see. I don't want to have to go into my camera menu to select different kinds of things. I don't even want to press a function button. I want everything on my dials easily able to be seen so that I can change my settings at the drop of a hat, because conditions change that quickly too. So on the top of the camera, you're able to change your ISO, your shutter speed, your exposure compensation, and you can also easily change your settings with these 2 dials that are right at your fingertips right here. Now, you may be thinking about aperture. I didn't mention that. One of the quirky things about Fuji cameras with their lenses is that the aperture ring is actually on the lens itself. So that's where you change the aperture on your lens. It's a little bit goofy when I first started to use these, but over time, I actually liked it a lot. Now with the camera dials, it can be really overwhelming to see all these numbers on the top of your camera at once, but after you get used to them over time, they actually become second nature to you, and it's so much easier to use them all on top of your camera rather than diving into your camera menu. Now, if I wasn't already obsessed with these camera dials enough, I find way more hidden gems the more I use them. So under the ISO dial, you can actually change between things like HDR and bracketing your photos. And under this one, you can quickly switch between still photos and a video setting, which I just found to be really, really useful because that's doubling dials down on the top of your camera, which is so handy. Now that I find myself in the middle of Fern Gully here, let's continue our tour around the exterior body of the XT5. One of the huge drawbacks on this camera is that there is no rotating LCD screen. The LCD screen is always exposed to the elements. Now we'll get into weather sealing in just a little bit, but if you're touting weather sealing as being one of the best on the market, why not have a protective covering on your LCD screen to make it that much more protected? And also, why not just continue rotating this LCD screen all the way around? On their website, they say this is a 3-axis LCD screen, which is cool because I do like shooting low perspectives. I do like shooting high perspectives. And the LCD screen tilting allows me to see both of those. But if I'm down in a weird situation like this, I can't flip that LCD screen around so that I can see what I'm photographing. And more often than not, I'm in weird situations like that. So why all camera makers don't do that, I have no idea. Sony also seems to have a problem with understanding that as well. Real quick, if you're liking what you're seeing about the XT5 and you want to learn more about it, like price, where to find it, I have a link in the video description as well as the pinned comment that you can check out. This channel isn't sponsored by Fujifilm, but if you do choose to purchase an XT5 through that link, it gives our channel a little bit of a kickback so that we can continue to make videos like this. I mentioned weather sealing just a second ago, and in just a second we'll get into like the sensor size and the pros and cons of this sensor and how it actually acts. But with so much attention focused on the weather sealing of this camera, I wanted to try it out. Now, I'm not into the fake reviews where they just tell you about the weather sealing. I actually want to test it out. So what I did was set up the XT5 in my yard, turned it on, and sprayed it down with my water hose on the full blast setting. While gallons of water hit this camera at full force, it actually still turned on and worked, surprisingly. So even though the lenses and the camera itself just say weather resistant, I would have no hesitation about taking this camera out into a rainstorm to photograph waterfalls or do storm photography with it, anything like that. Performed very well. One minor thing about that test was that it was extremely humid on the day that I was testing it. And when I first got out here to start testing this camera and taking photos to see what they actually looked like, there was a little bit of water vapor and humidity on the inside of the lens, which I thought was a little bit strange. Had it been on the sensor itself, I wouldn't have been too worried, but there was a little bit of water residue around the rim of this actual mount of the camera, which was a little bit concerning. But then again, when are you gonna spray down a camera with a hose? That was an extreme test. Everybody always wants to know about sensor size on a camera and how many megapixels that it actually has. So let's jump into that. This is a 40.2 megapixel APS-C sensor. Now, don't let APS-C turn you off, because Fuji has perfected APS-C sensors and they perform very well. The file sizes on these are tremendous, and you can do anything you want to in post-processing with any photo that's taken on this camera. Several years ago, I actually used an XT30, and it remains to be my favorite sensor that I've actually used, a Fuji sensor. And with that amount of time passing between that camera and this camera, I was really pleased to see the improvements on this sensor, even though it's still an APS-C. Now, this sensor itself is an X-Trans CMOS sensor, which basically is just fancy talk for being this is a really high-res APS-C sensor, which is how they pack so many megapixels into a small sensor like this, which reduces weight of the camera and reduces the size of the camera as well, allowing you to pack more gear into your bag and go further distances. The photo files from this camera are clean, and there's no better glass on the market than Fuji glass, and they have so many lenses to fit the XT5. It's basically a no-brainer if you're worried about lens selection with this camera. Another cool feature when it comes to the inside of this camera is that it is an IBIS system of up to 7 stops. Now, what is IBIS? IBIS is in-body internal stabilization on your camera, and if it has up to 7 stops of IBIS on it, that means shaking and more hand-holding photos. This sensor is going to move around with the camera shakes to try and hold that photo still as long as possible. So you would probably be able to take photos up to 1/50th of a second, maybe even 1/40th of a second with this camera and still get clean photos. Now, if you're a manual shooter, one of the other dials that you'll want to know on this camera is this little guy right here. You can easily switch back and forth between manual shooting and other settings on this camera just by turning this dial, which is a little weird and a little bit quirky because that can bump inside your camera and maybe get thrown off. But then again, so can the camera dials on the top. So it's really not a big deal. Now, I've been out here testing the autofocus, and I've actually been chasing a bee around these wildflowers a little bit. And the autofocus, while it's tracking something that small, is a little bit shoddy. It's not the best. Granted, bees are really small. I'm not using a macro lens or anything like that, but I was at 55 millimeters at f2.8, and it was still a little bit slow. Now, that's not really a huge deal for me because I'm a manual focuser because I shoot landscapes most of the time, but just know that the autofocus tracking on this, while good, it's not the best. Now, Fuji has always made really good cameras, and I thought one of the coolest things about that was that they built the history into this camera. What do I mean by that? Well, in the camera, you actually have 19 different film simulation modes that you can use to kind of create your own style, look, feel to how you want to go and take photos. These are all based on the history of Fujifilm, their film that they produced back in the day before digital, and also some monochromatic black and white and sepia options for you to shoot with as well. With 19 at your fingertips, you're never really going to run out of options for you to shoot with. I thought that was a really cool feature to put into the camera, and one that I played around with this scene behind me. It's also really easy to access. All you have to do when you're taking photos is just press the left button on your menu keypad, and then you can scroll through all the different features that you have at your fingertips. One last thing about this cool sensor is that they tout that it can shoot up to 100 260 megapixels if you do a multi-shot combination. Now, before you get all hyped about that, that's actually kind of a drawback for me, because to do that, you actually have to use their software to do the same thing with the photo. And who wants another editing software to have to sift through and use? Why not just do it in camera with the technology that's available, since other cameras do that anyways? So the question is this: is the Fujifilm X-T5 a legitimate camera for you to use for your photography? I would say absolutely yes. I wouldn't hesitate to use this as my main camera, even though there are other full frame cameras out there that shoot at higher resolution, 50 megapixels. The files that come out of this are so clean. Now, the drawbacks are there. Kind of a questionable thing with the humidity on the inside of the lens, with the weather sealing test, the LCD screen not coming all the way around, the small grip here. The most concerning about those is the weather sealing, but then again, when are you actually dousing this camera with a hose? The only time you had seen rain like that is in a hurricane, and I hope you'd be taking shelter inside. The pros here are the actual sensor, because it's really good, the image files, and the amount of lenses that you can also get with the X mount that comes on the Fujifilm X-T5. While the dials on top do take a little bit of time to get used to, they're really good, and I find them more pleasing to shoot with than any other menu option on the market. If you're looking for more camera gear reviews before you purchase anything or make any decisions, click or tap this video showing up right here that's gonna help you even more.